The grand courtroom was thick with tension. At its center sat Daniel Reed, a 22-year-old millionaire whose once confident posture had crumbled. He was accused of a crime he hadn't committed, and the evidence was twisted against him. Moments earlier, his high-priced lawyer had stood up in frustration and walked out, declaring the case unwinnable. Reporters snapped photos of the humiliated young man, broadcasting his supposed fall from grace. The crowd whispered, some with pity, others with cruel satisfaction. Even the judge seemed weary of the spectacle, rubbing his temples and sighing as if the outcome was inevitable. Daniel dropped his gaze to the floor, shoulders heavy with betrayal and shame. He felt utterly alone, framed for something that would destroy his future. But then, in the thick silence that followed the lawyer's dramatic exit, a small, clear voice rang out, startling everyone. "I can defend him." Heads turned sharply. At the back of the courtroom stood Lila, just 8 years old, her hair tangled, her clothes threadbare, and her feet bare on the cold floor. People laughed uncomfortably at first, certain it was a prank or an outburst to be silenced. But Lila didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Daniel, who looked at her in confusion and dawning recognition. The judge blinked in surprise. "Young lady, who are you?" he asked, more gently than before. "I'm Lila," she said, voice trembling but strong. "He saved my life." A hush spread. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. Lila's words revealed a truth no one had known. Daniel had quietly paid for her hospital treatment when she was dying of pneumonia in a crowded shelter. He used to bring food to the children there, sit with them, listen to them. He never wanted credit. He never told anyone. As Lila spoke, Daniel's eyes filled with tears. The mask of the cold millionaire fell away, replaced by the face of a young man who had given all he could to help the forgotten. The courtroom transformed in that moment. Lila's small voice cut through cynicism and greed with raw, undeniable truth. Even the judge seemed moved, leaning forward to listen to every word. Daniel wasn't a criminal. He was a quiet savior. And all it took was the courage of one little girl to make the world see it. People in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably, some letting out uneasy chuckles at the absurdity of it, a barefoot 8-year-old claiming she could defend a man facing prison. The judge raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain order but unable to hide his curiosity. "Little girl, who are you?" he asked, voice firm but not unkind. Lila took a deep breath, her small hands balled into fists at her sides. "I'm Lila," she said, her voice cracking with raw honesty. "He saved my life." A stunned silence fell. Daniel stared at her, recognition and disbelief battling in his eyes. For a moment, it was as if time paused. As she continued, the courtroom seemed to fade around her words. A quiet flashback unspooled in everyone's imagination. Daniel, years earlier, visiting a crumbling shelter where Lila lived with her sick mother. He would arrive without cameras or press, bringing boxes of food, warm clothes, and medicine. He had quietly paid the hospital when Lila nearly died of pneumonia, asking the staff to keep it anonymous. No one in the courtroom had ever heard about it. Daniel had never bragged, never sought a thank you. Lila's voice shook with urgency and pain. "Everyone thinks rich people are bad. They think they don't care. But he was the only one who saw me. He was the only one who helped." Her words were simple, but they landed with more force than any polished legal argument. The reporters lowered their cameras, the jury watched her with wide eyes. Even the judge leaned forward, his stern demeanor softening. Daniel swallowed hard, tears welling up despite himself. He had expected nothing but condemnation that day. But here was the truth he had tried to hide out of humility, spoken by the one person who owed him nothing except gratitude. In that moment, the trial stopped being about evidence and arguments. It became about humanity. And it was an 8-year-old girl who reminded everyone in that room what compassion, gratitude, and justice really meant. A heavy silence blanketed the courtroom, more powerful than any gavel strike. The judge, visibly moved by Lila's sincerity, nodded gently. "Go on," he said, his voice softer now. Lila looked around nervously but held her ground. She stepped closer to the front, her small feet echoing on the cold marble floor. Daniel couldn't look away, tears welled in his eyes, his chest rising with emotion. This child, whom he had helped quietly, had now become his only voice when everyone else had walked away. Reporters, who had been scribbling eagerly moments ago, now froze. Their cameras hung loose around their necks. The usual courtroom tension had turned into something deeper, something sacred. Everyone was just listening. Lila took a breath. "He used to bring food to our shelter. Not just any food, real meals, like lasagna and fruit. He didn't just drop it off. He sat with us, talked to us like we mattered. When my mom was sick, and I got really cold and couldn't breathe, the nurses said a stranger angel paid for everything. That was him." The prosecutor rose, trying to object, but his voice faltered. The strength of Lila's words had drained the fight from the room. Nothing he could say would match what the court was feeling. Lila's voice trembled, but she continued, her words cutting through the quiet like a blade of truth. "He never asked for anything. Never told anyone what he did. But now he's here, alone, and nobody believes him." She turned to the jury, her eyes wide and pleading. "If you call him guilty, then who will help the next girl like me?" The question hung in the air like a sacred weight. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about the kind of world they wanted to live in, a world where kindness was punished, or where truth could still matter. In that moment, hearts shifted. The room didn't just see a millionaire on trial. They saw a quiet hero, and a little girl brave enough to remind them all what goodness really looks like. The room felt charged, as if everyone was holding their breath. Lila's words had cracked something open, something raw and human. Jurors exchanged glances, their carefully guarded expressions softening. Even the judge sat straighter, as if seeing the defendant with new eyes. Then, from the back of the gallery, a woman slowly rose, clutching her purse to her chest. Her voice trembled. "He helped me too," she said. All eyes turned. She wiped a tear away. "My husband was dying, and I couldn't pay the hospital bills. He covered them. I didn't even know his name then." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Another man, older, in a faded work shirt, stood up next. His voice cracked with emotion. "Our house burned down last winter. My wife and kids had nowhere to go. Daniel gave us shelter in his apartment building for free. No questions asked." The prosecutor's mouth opened, but no words came. He sat down slowly, realizing the fight was slipping away. Reporters who had come for a scandal now lowered their cameras, shame flickering across their faces. The story they wanted, a fall from grace, was being replaced by something they hadn't expected, the quiet truth of a good man's hidden generosity. One by one, more people stood, each sharing their own small miracle. The single mother who'd found groceries on her porch. The elderly man who'd had his power bill paid anonymously. The teenager who'd received books and tuition fees without knowing the donor. All threads of the same tapestry, a young millionaire who had used his wealth not for show or power, but for saving lives and giving hope. Daniel sat frozen, tears streaming down his face, the weight of his secrets finally lifted, not by his own words, but by those he had helped. In that moment, the trial lost its edge of accusation. It wasn't about technicalities or strategy anymore. The case was being dismantled not just legally, but morally, by truth, by gratitude, and by the unshakable proof of one man's quiet, selfless heart. The courtroom held its breath as the jury filed back in, their faces solemn but transformed. The foreman stood, paper trembling slightly in his hand. "We find the defendant not guilty." For a moment there was silence, as if no one dared believe it. Then applause broke out, echoing off the high ceilings in waves of relief and joy. Reporters forgot their notebooks, clapping with genuine smiles. Jurors wiped their eyes. Even the bailiff couldn't hide his grin. Daniel slumped forward in his chair, overcome. Tears streamed freely down his face. He looked around in disbelief before rising unsteadily. Lila ran to him without hesitation. He dropped to his knees and pulled her into a hug, sobbing into her thin shoulder as she held him tight. The judge watched the scene, his stern face softened into a rare, gentle smile. "Sometimes," he said, his voice carrying through the hush that followed, "truth doesn't need a lawyer. Just a brave little heart." The room quieted at those words, everyone aware they were witnessing something unforgettable. Days later, the headlines told a different story than anyone expected, not about a fallen millionaire, but about the silent good he had done. Daniel didn't retreat from the world after the trial. Instead, he met with Lila's mother and made them family, officially adopting them so they would never face hunger or fear again. He used his resources to launch a foundation for underprivileged kids, focused on food, education, and shelter, his promise that no other child would have to stand in a courtroom to be heard. At every event, Lila stood proudly by his side as the program's youngest ambassador, her once-worn clothes replaced with bright dresses, her smile radiant. And as they cut the ribbon on the foundation's first shelter, cameras flashed, not to shame him, but to celebrate hope reborn. In a world loud with judgment, the narrator's voice might say over such an image, "Sometimes it takes a child's voice to speak the loudest truth, and save a life."